Hi, I'm Kevin, and this is Novel to You, where I read novels, my own novels. I'm reading from Taemane, and this is part 2, okay? Chapter 3 and 4 today. I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. The long, blood-red table could seat 16, though, like usual, there were just the 3 of them. The walls were stark white with several period paintings, and none of the expected animal trophies peering down. Karl Ostenstadt always thought the penchant for taking life, to display it on a wall, to be a disgusting and macabre practice. Behind Karl was a portrait of Beth, his wife, and the resemblance to young Kate was striking. Both had fine, round faces, hazel eyes, and flowing brown hair. Fine Dutch china graced the table. It was his grandmother's, and was always brought out on Sundays to provide a bit of finery and elegance to their evening meal. The 3 of them were gathered at one end, with the 2 girls on either side of their aging father. Karl had begun to show his age over the past 6 months, and Kate, now 14, and her 19-year-old sister Claire were concerned over his weight and the condition of his lungs. The old man's lungs had deteriorated due to his love of cigars. His coughing fits could sometimes be extreme, and the doctor, who visited every month, had been strict with him. But their father was a hard-driven, determined man, and though fair, only took the advice that suited him. Kate stared at her food, struggling to finish the meal, a strict requirement in the household. She'd had to put up with the antagonizing Claire throughout the evening. Claire was tall, thin, and wasp-like. She couldn't have been more different from the petite Kate. Claire had been away to boarding school and returned an even more sour, bitter young woman. Her face, with a tight, shrew-like nose and narrow eyes, was mean. But she was intelligent, and had already begun to benefit the mine with her knowledge and attention to detail. She had an aptitude for business, just like her father. Karl glanced up at Kate. He watched her pick aimlessly at her food. She was his favorite. He, too, had lost his appetite, sickened by the bickering between the 2 young women. Claire dropped her knife loudly on her plate and glared across at her sister. "Well, I think it's disgusting." Kate spat the comment back at her. "You'd be surprised how little people care what you think, Claire." "You should watch your mouth. You talk like a Kaffir." "Don't use that word in my house," Karl snapped. "You're an ugly, prissy tart, Claire," Kate hissed at her sister. "Enough! Damn it, the 2 of you! Your mother would be would be disgusted with your..." His body racked with a coughing fit. His massive chest heaved as he gasped for air. Mary, ever present, was there to help. "For the love of God, behave with a little decency, the 2 of you," he gasped through his coughs. "But Claire is always having a go at me, Dad. She hates everything I do. She even hates Alex. He's done nothing, but she treats him like he's not one of us. For Christ's sake, he's black, or do you think he's the same as us? He's a hell of a lot nicer than you bitchy tart." Kate hurled the water in her glass across the table, hitting Claire square in the face. Claire screamed, and as Kate relished her achievement, she was stung across the face with a slap from her father. "On your mother's soul, you 2 are a nightmare to me." He coughed again and struggled to his feet. His bulk leaned heavily on the table before him. He pushed the fine china across the table away from him. "I said stop it! The 2 of you! Your language is disgusting." Kate cowered in the chair, holding her face. She had never been struck by her father. He was her world. How could he slap her? She peered at that favorite face. Why did he hit her? The old man looked down at the hazel eyes. A tremor of confusion and angry frustration raced through him. He had never done anything like this. Her eyes were full of shock and pain. A torture of misunderstanding streamed from her eyes, his baby's eyes. He reached out to hold her, but she slipped off the chair and ran from the room. Katie! Katie! Oh, blast it! I would never... A fit of coughing attacked his massive frame, and his jowls glowed crimson. Mary rushed to his side, helping him back into his chair. Mary! Mary! You've got to... Sputtering broke through his voice. Help, Katie! She... The fit doubled him forward, and Kate held his frame. Mary held his frame. He grasped at the big woman's meaty arm. I can't. I don't know how. You, Mary, you've got to. Don't you worry. You just settle down, sir. Claire seized the opportunity and came to his side, placing an arm around the big man as he landed in the chair. She doesn't mean to set you off this way. She can't help being self-centered. She's young. What? Katie? Not responsible for... Another cough and a following rasp from his strangled ribs silenced his words. His eyes bulged as he struggled to contain the thundering coughs. The big man was reeling, half from the coughing and half from wanting to go to Kate. Mary struggled to control him. I'll get a cloth and some water. She rushed to the kitchen. Claire moved in close to the old man. We'll send her off to boarding school. That'll stop this insanity. The old man struggled to shake his head. It was the last place he wanted Kate to go. I'll show her where the blacks belong. They belong under our foot. I'll put a stop to all this Alex business. They've always been friends. And Alex, he's a good lad. I'll send her off to boarding school in Pretoria, even further, and get her head straight. Make a woman of that little tomboy. Mary appeared at the door with the glass and cloth. We've finished here. I'll take father through to the den. Mary stood just behind Claire and watched. There was a foul, manipulative air always near Claire, like the stench of milk souring or the hint of vegetables rotting. After Claire had crossed away with the old man, Mary glanced up at the painting of Beth and shook her head. How did so fine a woman end up with two wildly different girls? Sadness at the memory of her lost friend drifted over her, and she pouted. She reached for the first plate and put it on the trolley. A light breeze of despair echoed through her body, and perhaps a touch of shame. Mary didn't want to disappoint Beth. Beth had been a good woman, and she wanted her to be proud of her daughters. Mary was trying, but raising girls was very different than raising a boy. At least, those two were different than Alex. Mary's thoughts drifted to Kate and the slap on her cute little face. She was so pretty, but she was spunky. She'd like to go to find the girl, but knew that Claire would expect the table to be cleaned first. The water thrown in Claire's face was long overdue. Mary's bulk moved and drifted around the room. Mary was a mammoth woman, her face an immense ocean of kindness shored by roly-poly cheeks, an elegantly rotund woman. Her navy blue maid uniform was always pressed crisp, and she insisted on wearing a colorful headscarf. Beth had never objected to any of Mary's quirks. In many ways, Beth encouraged African life and food in the big house. Beth was a good woman from Yorkshire. Carl always joked that it was the home of England's strongest women, and how he had made a terrible mistake. But in truth, they had been inseparable. So many nights the young couple would sit on the veranda and talk till very late. Sometimes Mary would find her husband, Thomas, Justice, or even old George up there too. Beth was warm and inclusive of everyone. She had wanted to know everything about her new land, and though her accent was difficult at first, all the men took a shine to her. The thought of Thomas on the veranda with Beth sparked a touch of pride in her. Though it was impossible, she knew he would have been proud of their son, and how Alex and Kate had something special. impossible, but special. Her husband, Thomas, had been with Mr. Ostenstadt from the very beginning, when they first fenced out the claim. In those days, Carl was a hard man. He was young, strong, and with a fierce determination. But once Thomas got married, Carl always treated both of them with a special kindness. Sometimes, when Carl was still a bachelor, he used to dine with them on the veranda. Mary knew Carl Ostenstadt was a clever man and worked hard to bring his claim up. There had been difficulties in the early years with money and stealing, but whenever things got ugly, violent or unpleasant, even when there was fighting, she would always see Carl standing straight in the midst of it, with Thomas just behind, watching his back. Both men were unflinching, two friends, fair and hard. Was she letting all three of them down by not controlling the two girls? When Beth first arrived, Mary went to the station with Thomas to pick up the new bride, while Carl raced around trying to prepare the house. He'd had the claim on the diamond mine for 10 years by the time he went off to get married to the girl from Yorkshire, and he'd left the entire operation in the hands of Thomas, a black miner, and it seemed absolutely normal to Carl. Such was their trust. The young bachelor had been hopeless for the 2 weeks after the marriage, before his bride arrived. He had come back first to prepare their home. His excitement had made all the miners laugh. There was no end to the ribbing he took as a young man waiting for his bride to arrive. Though once all the miners got to know Beth, they thought she was special too. At the station, Beth had thrown her own bags into the Land Rover herself before Thomas could even get there, which embarrassed him no end. She was a small woman, but strong and shapely. Then Beth climbed in the front seat beside Thomas and insisted on the three of them driving up to the mine together, sandwiched in the front seat so she could see her new prospect. She was so childlike. Those early years were wonderful. Beth wanted to know everything about the mine and African life. They spent so many hours together in the kitchen or sewing when the men worked late. It was that closeness that made Carl decide to build a little cottage around the back for Mary and Thomas. It was Beth who gave Alex his first bath, saying that she had a right to, as Mary had bathed Claire. Then, when she had Kate, after 2 miscarriages, she was an angel of happiness. But within days, the bleeding started, and she couldn't be saved. Mary's lips pursed, her chin dimpled, remembering the week of devastation. An inward gasp of air held her together. 2 great souls taken away only days apart. It had been difficult to care for Beth so soon after Thomas died. But it was necessary. Carl was outraged by the accident, and then the birth, and then he was destroyed by the death of Beth. For days, the mine, the men, their world plunged into a dark, dark stupor. But Kate was such a pretty baby. She pulled everyone together, the same way her mother did. She nursed off Mary's sister, who'd had a child a month before and was milking heavy. The baby Kate stayed with Mary in the cottage during the first months after the 2 deaths. Carla often slept in a chair just outside her bedroom door through most of the night before slipping back into the big house before Claire woke. It was such a horrible time, and yet the spirit of Beth seemed to burst forth from the baby. She smiled to herself, thinking how she used to explain to Claire and Kate that our lives had cloudy days and sunny days. When the girls were upset or lonely, they just had to wait, and soon enough the sun would shine through. She used to tell them that the sun was Beth, smiling down on them, making sure the sisters were good to each other. Those days were distant now. Those words didn't help anymore, not with Miss Claire. She had grown up a very different, separate woman to the rest of the family. Each clatter of the plates was like a reminder of Claire's presence in the house. Mary had come to dislike Claire and wouldn't trust her at all. But because of Alex, Mary had to tread softly around her. Things were becoming so different now. The Pretoria boarding school had released a viper in Claire. There was a click to Mary's left, and the door creaked ajar. Kate's brown hair tumbled through as she peeked gingerly into the room. Mary waved the petite girl over. Kate, still crying, ran to the big woman and lost herself in the billows of fabric. The voluminous breasts and bear-like arms swallowed the little body in a cocoon of safety and unconditional kindness. "Don't you worry, child. You have a heart just like your mother. It is as pure as those diamonds your daddy finds. The only good things can come to you." "I hate her." Now, you're just angry. She says such evil things about Alex. Why, he's my only friend." Kate lifted her head off the massive chest and stared at the roly-poly cheeks. A meaty black hand with peach-soft palm swept the tears from her cheeks. "Now, you run along into the kitchen. Alex is in there, and he might be your best friend, but if you don't hurry, he will polish off those last 2 pieces of pie. You know how that boy can eat." Kate smiled, kissed the big woman's jolly cheeks, and raced to the kitchen entrance. "Alex, you pig! You better leave some for me." Over the coming months, the intolerable demands and injustices heaped by Claire drove the old man to numerous purple coughing fits that left him gasping and desperate. After a particularly violent attack of coughing and Claire's baiting, the old man stumbled, knocking over a dining trolley as he crashed to the floor. Seeing him prostrate on the floor, gasping for air, Kate had to acquiesce to the demands of Claire for her father's sake. Claire had beaten Kate. Carl knew it was necessary, but had hoped to delay it until she was 16. He thought he might reduce the time apart from his favorite daughter, but Claire had forced his hand. She had forced everyone's hand. Less than 2 months later, it was an unusually cool morning, everything quite still, when Kate watched her father walk up to the main house. He took so much longer now than he used to. His frame was still big, but he stooped more, and when he did arrive, he was out of breath. Mary had seen him coming and was at the step with a glass of water and an elbow to guide him to the chair beside Kate. He glanced at the studies scattered on the table. Father Stanley was the main conduit for learning in the area, and as classes were only 3 days a week, he applied a huge amount of home study for the few students that he had. Carl smiled at the impish eyes that tickled his heart. She was fast becoming a woman, and her beauty, like Beth's, enveloped those around her. She swallowed others with the kind of warmth that cradled a heart, like calming a frightened sparrow. He could feel the familiar dull ache race from his chest. It had been 14 years, and he still missed his one love. Kate slammed her books closed and drummed her pencil on his chest, looking at him. Happy thoughts gurgled from her eyes with the freshness of a clear stream. "Don't tell me you have run off from the clutches of Claire to think you can have one of your cigars up here, Dad." He laughed at the thought. "Oh, yes, a cigar. It wouldn't be a bad idea." He reached to his breast pocket, but the pencil stabbed into his pocket, stopping him. "No," she said. He smiled, and then reached into a back pocket for the one thing he knew would shatter her smiles. The letter of acceptance had been anticipated for weeks now, and he dropped it softly on the table in front of Kate. "Katie, you're 14, almost 15. It's what your mother would have wanted." Kate stared at the foul letter, knowing immediately what it must be. "But Daddy, Please, I don't want to leave you and Mary. Oh, what about Alex? He teased her, but she didn't find it funny. He could see the pulsing of her neck as she struggled not to cry in front of him. She was becoming a young woman and had the passion of a storm in her heart, just like her mother. She also had the pride and strength of her mother, though her voice betrayed her, quivering like a child in a cold, icy wind. Her voice was like a Christmas ornament to him, always fascinating and dancing. He hated forcing her to go. I will always obey you. I will always love you and Mary. I never knew Mommy. I'm sorry I never got to hold her. But would she force me away? Would she break my heart? We're not forcing you away. I love you, Kate. There's nothing more than don't break my heart. She shot from the chair and dashed to the doorway. The tears of a young love were fighting to burst through her pride. She turned back in the doorway, but was unable to look at her father. I'll go for you. Only you. She went upstairs. He heard her bedroom door slam. He slumped into the chair. It must be done. She must go to boarding school, must have everything he could provide for her. A tear fell on his sleeve. He was not ashamed. Such a love could not be ashamed. He watched the tear dissolve into the fabric. He looked up at the sky for an answer, for something. Beth must be there. She must help him. How could he hurt a heart so great, so very great? A weighty palm pressed down onto his shoulder. Don't worry, sir. Katie has a good heart, and Miss Beth will be watching over her. She always does. Thank you, Mary. He paused and held a cough down, then looked up at the smiling bulk. I can see them both up there. Thomas is hovering over Alex, and Beth is hovering over Kate, and both of them are laughing at you and I. He laughed, but it curdled into a cough, and he rolled to one side with a pain like horse hooves galloping across his ribs. Mary took his arm and led him inside. That's the end of chapter 3. And that's all for today. We're reading Taemane. That was part 2. I hope you enjoyed it.